An intra-company transfer visa. What is it and how do you apply? I'm going to show you in 3 steps in this video. So the intra-company transfer visa is a means by which you can be employed by an overseas company but work in the UK for a subsidiary of that company. There's got to be common ownership and control. It's got to be a branch in the UK or a subsidiary. And the idea is essentially that if you're working for an overseas company, it will give you the ability to work in the UK. Now, there are restrictions under the visitor visa category, essentially subject to very narrow restrictions. You can't work in the UK on a visitor visa. So that means you need to find some alternative. Now, one of the reasons why this is an interesting route is it's not a path to indefinite leave to remain and therefore a British passport through naturalising as a British citizen. But perhaps for that same reason, in the context of Brexit, when we're seeing very harsh restrictions on immigration control into the UK and the difficulty of some of the other routes, for example, the Tier 1 entrepreneur route, where you have a business plan and that's assessed by a civil servant, and there's a greater level of uncertainty as to how is that civil servant going to view the merit of your business plan. There's only so much you can control in the process. But with an intra-company transfer visa, you need to set up in the UK, incorporate. You need to have a business. In order to secure the sponsor license, you would need to have the supporting documents. From that, it follows you'd need to have, for example, employer's liability insurance. You'd need to register with HMRC. You'd need to have premises. You'd need to have the basics of a company in the UK, but you can do all of that as a foreign national, including setting up a UK bank account. You might need a British business partner for that on a practical level for setting up the bank account. But once you've got all of that, you can then apply for a sponsor license. And if you do so on the limited basis that it's for an ICT, the 3-letter acronym, tier for a sponsor license, just to bring in an overseas worker, that might be yourself as an owner, manager of the business, for example, it might be one of your employees, then that's relatively straightforward, if you like. It's in contrast with the sole representative route, which I dealt with in a live stream a couple of days ago, in which, as I explained, you really shouldn't be setting up in the UK. You should put forward your proposal for opening the branch or subsidiary in the UK. With the ICT idea, it's different. Now, although you can't secure indefinite leave to remain in the first instance under this route, once you've tested the water in the UK and you have a viable commercial entity and it's generating income, then you can add a Tier 2 general tier to that license and then move visa routes. Now, that would involve an application out of country. You'd need to apply for entry clearance. But if you compare that to some of the other paths, which are paths to indefinite leave to remain and then citizenship, like on the entrepreneur route, like the sole representative route, this path tends to be easier to manage, or at least delivers greater certainty in terms of the rules. And by certainty, I mean the rules are clearly set out. There's not as much scope for discretion or as much scope for uncertainty. As I say, the example being the assessment of your business plan. I think this is a huge problem at the moment. Before I get into the details in this video, what we're going to do is have a look at the intra-company transfer visa route. But I think it's a big problem that's recognised, I think, by governments at the moment. Because the assessment of many visa applications is too uncertain. We incorporated the Australian system, points-based system, or at least those principles, that approach into the rules to deliver greater certainty, to attract people to come to the UK who have talent or capital and want to invest, for example, or who are entrepreneurs. But increasingly in recent years, we've introduced ever more discretion, and at the same time, it's been a very anti-immigration climate. And what that's meant is that there's greater uncertainty as to how your visa application is going to be determined. So the ICT route, I think, provides an attractive alternative, which will be appropriate for some. So, having said all of that, do let me know. And this is just a brief introduction for those who are viewing this video and seeing this channel for the first time. I'm Tom Bradford. I'm a lawyer. I'd be very happy to assist you with that intra-company transfer visa. You can contact me by email or WhatsApp. On this channel, we cover all of the visa routes for the jurisdictions that we focus on and look at visa support and citizenship. So if you're preparing an application, do by all means get in contact to ensure first-time success. Now, what I'm going to do on this video is have a quick look at the rules with you. So it looks like this is showing, bearing in mind this is a live stream. Hopefully it will work. So this is the basic provision. An intra-company transfer migrant is a migrant granted leave under paragraphs 245G to 245GF of the rule. So what we're going to do now is have a look at them. Let's see what they provide. So the route enables multinational employers to transfer their existing employees from outside of the EEA. So importantly, if you're within the European Economic Area, at least pre-Brexit, then this doesn't apply. You have a treaty right to come to the UK. This is just applicable to non-EEA migrants. Interestingly, post-Brexit, we may have something similar to these provisions operating for European nationals, but we're not there yet. So there's two subcategories under the route. Long-term staff, so that's for established employees of multinational companies who are being transferred to a skilled job. That's important, I'll come back to that, which could not be carried out by a new recruit from the resident workforce. Then there's also graduate trainees. Now, I'm not going to focus on graduate trainees in this video because it's not relevant to most or to many of my clients. So let's just go into the detail of what the requirements are. Requirements for entry clearance. So this is the first visa application you make from outside of the country. To qualify for entry clearance as a Tier 2 intra-company transfer migrant, an applicant must meet the requirements listed below. That's what we're coming to. If they meet it, they'll be granted. If they don't, then it won't. So it is as straightforward as that. So here's the requirements. So an applicant must not fall for refusal under the general grounds of refusal, and that essentially covers conduct-related matters or previous refusals or re-entry bans. By all means, let me know if you're in one of those positions. But assuming there's not that sort of issue, you've got to have 50 points. Now let's just go straight to what those points are. Got this in the next slide. So first of all, you've got to have a certificate of sponsorship, for which you have 30 points, and then you've got to have an appropriate salary, for which you get 20 points. Now, the certificate of sponsorship comes from having secured a sponsor license, and I'm going to do a separate series about this, where exactly how you apply for a sponsor license and all the steps involved. By all means, subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see that detail. But essentially, to do that, to apply for a sponsor license, you need to have incorporated. You need to have an entity. It can be a startup or a startup, subsidiary of the overseas company. But you've got to have a minimum number of things: bank account, premises, not virtual premises. Although something like WeWork, where you have a lease and it's flexible, you can expand the amount of space available, would generally be fine. All depends on the business, of course. Then the required documents, as I say, you've got to have registered with HMRC for PAYE, pay as you earn tax, and for corporation tax to have two of the required documents that you need. And especially for the intra-company transfer route, you've basically got to have a affidavit which shows what all of the connected companies are, basically, so UKPI can do its due diligence, if you like, on those overseas entities. So that will be your overseas company, and it may be that there are other companies within the group, but the test is it's got to be common ownership and control between the UK entity and the overseas entity from which employees are going to transfer, or from which you're going to transfer, let's say. So common ownership and control is the key, and for that reason you'll need to have you'll need to show, for example, that the UK entity is 100% owned by the overseas entity. That'll be one way of satisfying it. There are others though. So that's the idea. Now, once you have that sponsor license, you secure the certificate of sponsorship, and you need to make an application for your certificate of sponsorship. And when I say you need to make the application, it's the UK entity that needs to make the application. It is the sponsor license holder, and it's responsible for managing the immigration process and sponsoring you. And the certificate of sponsorship is the electronic document which confirms the UK's support for you coming over to the UK. So that's the basic idea. Once the certificate of sponsorship has been granted, then the visa is as good as granted. You still need to apply, but it's essentially a formality, and that's because the UKVI is delegating its responsibility for the immigration process to the private sector, although some public bodies can have sponsor licenses as well. That's essentially what it's doing here for your private company. The company, the overseas company, in other words, the company in the UK, is responsible for managing the immigration process, and will then assign the certificate of sponsorship to you, and it can apply for more certificates of sponsorship. Now, there are two kinds of certificate of sponsorship: restricted and unrestricted. We're going to look at that in more detail in future, but this type of certificate of sponsorship is easier to secure if you're coming on an intra-company transfer basis. Now, interestingly, the intra-company transfer visas used to be a means for naturalising as a British citizen. Or in other words, a route to indefinite leave to remain, after which you could then naturalise as a British citizen. But that is no longer the case. So it deems to be, I think, an immigration pathway which is of less risk, or which will probably attract less scrutiny, although all applications will attract scrutiny. But I think it's a pathway where you don't necessarily fall into the legal uncertainty which is associated with the assessment of business plans, as is the case with sole representative route and the entrepreneur visa route. Having said that, let's have a look at the next provision. So you've got to have an appropriate salary. Let's just have a look at that. If you bear with me a second, I'll just see if I can bring up the relevant provision. Okay, so here we are. If the applicant is applying in the long-term staff subcategory, and the exception below does not apply, so there is an exception, the salary is 41,500 sterling per year, or the appropriate rate for the job as stated in Appendix J, whichever is higher. So that's going to be the minimum for 41,500. And bear in mind here that the employer is the overseas entity. So maybe you're already employed outside of the UK by your company, but the employer remains the overseas company while you're in the UK. That's the whole basis for this immigration route. So having said that, let's have a look at the rest of the provisions. Yeah, this is quite important in terms of the actual assessment of the salary. Where the applicant is paid hourly, the appropriate salary consideration will be based on earnings up to a maximum of 48 hours per week, even if the applicant works longer than this. For example, an applicant who works 60 hours a week for 14 per hour will be considered to have a salary of 34,944 and not 43,680. and will therefore not be awarded points for the appropriate salary. So you have to calculate that carefully. I'll just run through the other requirements. So that was basically, those are the requirements stated here. So in point B, that the applicant must have a minimum of 50 points. So I've explained what that means. I've explained what the certificate of sponsorship means. And the rest of the requirements are set out here. By all means, check those out. I'll probably put a link below, or you can have a look at those by pausing the video now. So those are the essential requirements for the intra-company transfer visa. You can, if you secure this, then as a visa route, you can stay in the UK for 5 years, but it can be extended subject to your salary to up to 9 years. So it gives you an excellent lead-in period to test your business in the UK, I think. So I think this is really important, and you see this for comparable visa categories for the US. I think this is a great category for testing the water in the UK. If you don't necessarily want to fully commit huge resources yet into the UK, but you want to test the UK market, then, as I say, in the context of Brexit, in this perhaps more difficult or uncertain immigration environment, this provides an excellent option for you for expanding your overseas business into the UK. As ever, do get in contact with me if you need any assistance. I'd be very pleased to help you. Thanks for watching this video. In tomorrow's live stream, we're going to cover another related topic, and we're also going to be looking at how to apply for a sponsor license as well in due course. Thanks very much for watching. Be well and see you soon.